group today, partly because I think because a lot of people, the majority of our clients probably don't have equipment costs. So what that means is going to be a real, interactive session, and hopefully you'll get all kinds of interesting questions answered that'll work for your company or all your questions about equipment costs. So my name is Mary Kay Campbell. We also in our room this morning have Gary Fredericks from CPA Technologies, and he's another of our consultants, and Wayne Hawking. And Wayne, you are from, your company name is? Delta Alliance. And Wayne's company does not have equipment costs, so I'm thinking he's here to just learn a little bit about what it can do, maybe an overview of equipment costs. Is there anything specific you want to cover? So, okay. And I'm going to jump to the gentlemen from Weaver Companies who are online, which are Matt Reel and Kevin Esch. And Kevin and Matt, you do currently have equipment costs. Welcome. Yep. And what would you like to learn about equipment costs today?
Specifically, I would like to take a little closer look at what the capabilities are on maintenance. I know there's like a maintenance section on there and keeping records, stuff like that, what all we can do with that.
Okay, the maintenance section. Okay, great. Yep. And I will mention that there is a full equipment maintenance additional program by a third party that you can add on to the software. Yeah, that was one, that's another add-on product that we can get you additional information on, but today we can definitely explore maintenance and what you can do within the software that you already own. How are you currently using equipment costs? Are you entering your pieces of equipment when you process your payroll?
Yeah, our biggest piece we're using equipment costs for is for tracking revenue internally. So we have several pieces of equipment for excavation. So all those pieces, the operators are writing down on their time card what equipment they're using, and then we enter that in the equipment module each hour they use each equipment, so that the cost gets hit to the job and the revenue gets entered in our equipment GL to offset all the depreciation and the costs.
Okay, perfect. Okay, and so you're actually entering those revenue entries into the equipment module, not entering, correct. As the guys are working, you're not entering the payroll time with a piece of equipment.
I think I understood your question.
Okay.
We're entering the time in the equipment module based on their time card, but not like
on their time cards. But when you're okay, so we're going to talk a little bit, so you know that it's a capability that is out there. You can also, if you wish, set up payroll, and I know your company does some unique things with importing your payroll time. But if you are using, I'm going to use the example so everybody else can relate to it. When you set up your time entry grid in payroll, we can set it up so that you can enter a piece of equipment when you enter the payroll time, if that's of any interest to anybody. Just another way. Yeah, that way you don't have to go into equipment to enter the revenue for the equipment. In equipment costs, it can be done as you process your payroll.
Well, so that would be good for us to see as well, because we do handle our excavators differently.
Okay.
They just do normal paper time cards just because they write down their equipment, and our other third-party time card thing doesn't support equipment. So I'd be curious to see how you recommend, or what easier ways there are to their time and equipment.
Okay. Tracking, entering. I'm going to say entering, options for entering. Let me just options for entering equipment revenue.
Mm-hmm.
Directly into equipment versus through payroll. Leave it at that. Great. Any other questions today? Change the font on this to make this a little bit more legible. All right, thank you. That was Matt and Kevin, and welcome, Judy. Judy Burkholder is on the line. I'm not sure, she's joined the meeting. I'm not sure if her audio is up and running yet.
I'm here. Hi.
Hi. We have a small group today because I think it's because not a lot of our clients, you know, there was a decent number of people who are using equipment, but the majority are not. So with our equipment costs, it's the people that are online today, all of you have, the online people all have equipment costs. So a couple people have said, you know, there's people in the room that they're saying, you know, we just want an overview of what it does. We don't have it. And then some people are saying we want to track equipment maintenance. And then we're going to talk about options for entering equipment revenue, equipment versus entering them in equipment versus through payroll. Is your company currently using your equipment module?
Yes.
Okay. And when you process your payroll, are you including the equipment on the entry when you enter your payroll time?
Yes, we do it two ways, so that's kind of what I was checking. We do it with equipment maintenance and also the using equipment.
Okay, so your company has, in addition to equipment costs, also have equipment maintenance, correct?
Right.
Okay, great. I'm hoping if we can your brain a little bit, if you don't mind. When we started this a couple minutes ago, Matt and Kevin from Weaver Company. Oh, that's really interesting that there's an equipment maintenance option there. So we're going to talk about the equipment maintenance that's available right within Sage, and we may ask you to kind of elaborate on some of the things that you're doing with equipment maintenance and talk about how that works, if you're so willing to share any of that information. That would be fantastic.
I guess the only thing we're entering through payroll is the time that they're working on the piece of equipment.
That's fine. Is anybody out there? And I think we may have another company or two joining us online, but we're going to not wait around for them. Are we entering when we enter our accounts payable invoices, are we charging our cost to our equipment? The cost for insurance and registrations and those kinds of things.
Yes, we are.
Okay. Wonderful. So I'm going to jump into kind of an overview of equipment, and just feel free to just jump in with any questions that you have. It sounds like everybody, you know, I don't know if you're muting yourselves or you, you know, are all just really quiet out there, which is fantastic for the purposes of this. But do feel free to just jump in with your questions. We do have a chat that we will attempt to monitor, but as I'm talking and looking, I tend, you know, to get carried away and not look at the chat all the time, but we'll go from there. So I'm going to go into equipment cost. And I'm going to start just by looking at the setup of a piece of equipment. So if we look at a piece of equipment, I'm going to pick on my case backhoe is fine. And I'm going to scrunch this up a bit so it's out of our way. And in here, let me look at a different one. I thought my first piece of equipment had a whole bunch of information on it, but it looks like that's not the case. I'm just going to kind of next. Okay, here's one. Here's a Caterpillar dozer. Not that there's a ton of stuff in here, but here's some of the information that you can kind of track in the system if you want to. And as you saw as I went previous and next, most of this information is optional. So for a piece of equipment, we can have a description, and you can track things like serial numbers, make, models, weight, gross weight, tare weights, length, width, heights. Think of all the stuff you can track for different reporting purposes. Within each piece of equipment, and also under setup, we set up different equipment types. And I'm just going to pull up a list just to give you an example of some of the types of equipment that we have in this sample data. Backhoes, dozers, cranes, forklifts, trucks, those kinds of things. But, you know, we were kind of talking a little bit internally before with Wayne here in the office about how some people have even used equipment costs to track things like this equipment. not so much in your own office, but down at job sites. If you have a job trailer and you want to track my computer and my camera and my fax machines are a little outdated, but whatever else you have happened to have out there. And sometimes the funniest stories are the real life ones that we come across. And we had one company that did site work, and they had to, they're required to have like it was near a body of water, a rowboat. And so they were, you know, they assigned a rowboat to wherever it was. Like there was just another piece of equipment, and the boat was there. And then at some point there was some kind of flooding issue or whatnot. And they're like, okay, where the heck is the rowboat? And they ended up going back to equipment costs. Okay, where was the last job site that we had this thing that we never used? And, you know, it did kind of help. It was kind of a joke that, yeah, we actually used it to track something goofy out of the system. So we tend to get creative with the software at times if we have it. So, you know, you don't have to just think of equipment types of things like backhoe and dozers and trucks, but you can also think of things like, you know, office equipment. The other thing you can do is you can set up and maintain like asset managers. So you can track, hey, this Caterpillar dozer is a piece of equipment for Dennis Sanford. Or you could say this, think of an office trailer. That might make a little bit more sense, where the person in charge at this job location is Dennis, and he is responsible for this list of equipment. And when the job site closes down, I'm going to give Dennis this list, and he better be able to be accountable. He's accountable for all these different pieces of equipment. And there's some miscellaneous codes that you can revamp and reuse as well through your custom fields, through customizing your fields and descriptions. Hi, Fred. And these can also be drop-down lists that you can customize. In the system, I'm just going to talk about some of these codes. We have different cost codes, and if I go into setup cost codes, there's a whole list of them, but typically when we set up our cost codes, there are a couple of different types of cost codes. And I'm going to cancel out of here for a moment and go into set up standard cost codes. And think of a piece of equipment kind of like you would think of a job. So kind of a job, when you talk about a job has cost codes, it has costs, and it has revenue, right? You're going to bill out your job to make money on it. You're going to set up and track your costs on the job to see whether that job is profitable. You can also do the same thing with equipment costs. So with equipment costs, you're going to be charging revenue to the jobs, which is a little bit different. I kind of thought, what do you mean it's revenue for the equipment? Well, when the equipment is out there working for you on a job site, if you're billing it to the job, it treats it as revenue for the piece of equipment. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, and it's one of the hard things about having a lot of people online is I can't see the puzzled expressions on your faces. So if that doesn't make sense, let me know and we'll try to get a little bit clearer. The cost side, I think, is pretty darn clear. We're tracking expenses and things that are costing us money to run that piece of equipment. And when we set up cost codes and revenue codes in Sage for equipment costs, they're separate from our cost codes in job costs. So for example, in here, if I go and I look at my list, in the sample data, they got a little, in my opinion, maybe a little bit carried away because, we're not an equipment maintenance company, but they're tracking this broken down to kind of like the header record, just like you'd have group cost codes. I wanted the tens are things to track things like that have to do with the engine. And I might break it down into the engine block with the heads versus the crankshaft versus blah, blah, blah. And then down to the tires down here. Is it a, 20-00 is kind of like almost a header for tires. And then is it new tires? Is it recap tires? Does anybody out there have this much of a detailed breakdown on your equipment cost codes for repairs of equipment? It's silent. I think not. No, I've had people where they just set up, repairs, equipment repairs and parts. And, you have a 10-100 might be equipment repairs. A 10-200 might be equipment parts, and that might be it. But the other thing that's kind of cool with equipment or with equipment cost codes is that we know that you have a couple of different types of cost codes. You have costs of operating those pieces of equipment, like you have to replace the tires and change the oil and that kind of thing. And that happens typically when you are utilizing the piece of equipment. But then you've got those administration costs like depreciation, insurance, permits, licenses, blah, 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 that aren't a cost of operating the equipment, they're a cost of owning the equipment. So you can track different types of cost codes. And it's crazy when we first work with a company to set up your different cost code breakdowns. You can have a multi-part. This is kind of an intermediate level of a cost breakdown in equipment. You can get even more carried away with it if you wish to. And then you can define your unit description there. So those are the different cost codes. And in my list, you can see that they get a little crazy with the cost breakdowns of owning those pieces of equipment. As they are utilized on the job, we can track that information in here. We can also set up what is called a memo cost. And if I click here and click on our help topic, oh, that's real helpful. So I love, sometimes equipment costs I think was kind of, on the short list where, hey, we need some enhancements with our help. But typically, if you want to track things that aren't hitting costs to like job costs and general ledger, like I want to track miles used, highway miles for IFTA reporting, or number of accidents, or those kinds of things, we can set up memo cost transactions as well. We can also use memo cost transactions for things like, let's say you rent a piece of equipment. You're short of backhoes, so you need to go rent one long term, and you're going to rent it for 6 months. And as you rent it, you need to track repairs to the piece of equipment. Just because you want to track repairs to that piece of equipment, even though the rental company is going to actually pay for the repair of the equipment because they own the equipment. So there's those kinds of things that you can deal with for memo costs if that is important. As we look through the system as well, you're going to see that you've got this little attachment button, so you can go in and add attachments to the system and notes and that kind of thing as well. So those are our cost codes. Our revenue codes, I'm going to look at setup, and I'm going to look at standard revenue codes. So we set those up as well. And typically they are a little simpler. Like we might have a revenue code 1, which is hourly, or H for hourly, 2 or D for daily, 3 or M for monthly. And then we tell it, how we are going to track our revenue. How are we going to bill the piece of equipment? And when we bill it, we're either billing it to the job, or we're billing it, let's say you have an equipment rental division and you want to bill it out to outside sources. You can do that as well. You can also put formulas in here if you need to track equipment breakdowns or that kind of thing. And you define the different ways that we track this information. So I'm going to jump to something where you can even track standby. So yeah, I'm billing it on the job because it's physically there. I need it on the job site, and there is a cost of keeping it there because I can't bill it anywhere else. So you might have a lower rate for your standby rate, and you might say that's in days. I want to track half a day or a whole day versus I'm charging it hourly. But you could say, no, we track it down to the hour on standby. So you can do that type of thing as well. Any questions on any of the capabilities as far as setting up revenue and costs? I'm going to continue, and we're going to look a little bit. If I look at that revenue code, once I'm on the piece of equipment, it's going to just track the revenue codes that I'm using for that piece of equipment. Miscellaneous entries is the same way. For this piece of equipment, I am not tracking equipment. It's kind of like in payroll. You've got a list of pay IDs, right? And you've got a global list, but they don't show up on the employee until the employee has actually earned some of those types of pays. So equipment works the same way. So if I back up and go to setup and I look at miscellaneous entry codes, here's where we're seeing those miscellaneous things like accidents, gallons of fuel that's used, downtime hours. And here's one where, you know, they're showing up alphabetical. So if I was setting this up from scratch, I might say miles dash Oregon, miles dash Washington, miles dash PA or Jersey. If you need to track and report for your, you know, different organizations, the number of miles that vehicles have run on the highway or something along those lines. Down to tires used, and this is kind of an interesting concept, number of tons of gravel or rock that have gone through a paver. So if you want to track any kind of miscellaneous information, this is the place to kind of track that information. Is anybody out there in the audience using miscellaneous entry codes to track something interesting?
No.
Oh, are you tracking anything in Excel for your equipment? Like one of my companies in South Jersey, it was like, okay, we need to track how many miles these pieces of equipment have driven on the highway. And they were doing it in Excel. So this became a really nice, and they owned equipment cost anyway, so this became a nice way to do that, and then they could run some reports off of it. If this is of an interest, what's kind of nice is as you track mileage and that kind of thing, when you update the accumulators, do you accumulate or do you replace? For example, if you were tracking things like an odometer reading and if there's a spot for it on the system automatically, it knows you're not going to add the next reading. You're just going to look at that odometer and say, oh, I've driven 2,500 miles in total, or 50,125 miles is the odometer reading. I'm not going to put the delta in between 50,125 and, oh, I'm going to put in I drove 6 miles today, not put in the entire, you're not going to say I drove 6 miles. You're probably going to look at the odometer and plug in that total. The miscellaneous entry codes can work the exact same way. You tell it for.
And where do you enter that mileage?
Okay.
If you would set that up. How's
What
that?
happens is what's going to happen is you're going to go into tasks, and you can enter your miscellaneous entries in here, right in equipment, the way some of you are entering your revenue. So this is kind of neat, and we'll take a look at how you define what those look like. So you define under tools, you're going to customize your daily entry, and you can customize it not only for those miscellaneous entries, but also for your costs and your revenues. If you don't like the way your entry grids look, either they have too much information or you wish they had a little bit more, we'll take a look at how those work. So I'm just going to say okay here, and I can just type a new one in here and tell it how I'm going to track. I'm just going to cancel that for right now. So those are the miscellaneous things, and on this front sheet you can also track different licenses and permits. So if you happen to need to get permits in different states, counties, whatever, it's not like there's just one license. You can give it a name here, PA DOT or PA, whatever you want to call it, and then issued by PennDOT. It expires on whatever date. I'm going to say it's 6/30/17, and there's a fee for it. Now, it's not creating any cost entries here. It's going to create the cost when you actually enter the invoice, the cost for probably through AP and hit the piece of equipment. But if you just want to track as a memo, hey, I know that this cost is going to be $45, whatever it happens to be. It's just for reporting purposes. So, whether you can use this however you wish, but it's not going to really do much with that fee. And you can set up custom fields. So if you're tracking a spreadsheet where you track some kind of license and permits, and it's not here, you can create custom fields. For example, these two here were the PA-DOT was one of my PennDOT things that I, license and permits here. I could create custom fields for that. Oh, not in here. I can't create them from here. What I would do is under File, Company Settings, Custom Descriptions, I could set up those custom fields if I needed to. Okay. The other thing you can do in those, I believe, is, come on, you can I'm going to my custom fields there, and I can get into attachments. So if I wanted to put a copy of that current license or permit or whatever, I could attach it here, or through our paperless construction software, through our document management software. We've got a couple choices there. You could use that program for it instead, and then that might have a more global way to pull up that documentation. You wouldn't have to go to the equipment and pull it from there. You could pull it right from your document management software. So that's it for licenses and fees. And the one that I think is interesting is the people who are starting to yawn on the phone and say, yeah, we've been here. I think is kind of interesting is under additional information, you can track information about equipment that you rent and then charge revenue to a job or to outside places. You can track under additional information, spec information, which you would set up your own custom field in there. Ownership information, when did I acquire it? What was my price? Who did we get it from? Now this does not link to a vendor ID. That might be a really cool enhancement request, but they're just text fields. But you can track all this kind of information if you want to use that for reporting purposes. And then other is, we've set up a custom field for, say, desired utilization, 125. Is it hours, days, whatever, you define that. So those fields are here, and people tend not to remember that they're there. Just a little reminder. Under usage, if you have a piece of equipment attached to another piece of equipment, think about your landscape company, and in the winter you plow snow. And you need to keep track of which blade is attached to which truck. This is the way you can do that. You can have an attached piece of equipment attached to another of equipment. I would probably on the blade say it's attached to a truck or something, but you can have this work however you need to. You can track the status. Is it in service or out of service? Put in dates. And you're going to see certain fields like location and odometer readings that are grayed out, because as you enter the readings, it's going to update these fields. So kind of like in job cost, if you go to set up a job, there are fields that should be grayed out because you don't want people going in there and just plugging in numbers. You want the audit information behind the scenes to be there. This works the same way. And then there's a spot to plug in configuration information and maintenance information. And somebody asked, as the meeting was starting, what kind of stuff can we track for maintenance? And you'll notice when you come in here, there is a spot for a date and a description in here. However, there is a limit to this. So I've had people who said, yeah, this is going to be great, and they start entering maintenance information, and after a while, they say, oops, I hit a limit. What do I do now? And our options at that point are to say, well, I really can put that old maintenance information in an attachment like a Word doc, or maybe a better way to handle it is to create a memo transaction called maintenance, where you're going to set up a maintenance type of transaction, and you're going to put the date in along with a description. And we can take a look at that and then have a whole report that just goes on and on and on throughout the life of that product. Because you may not hit a description there, you hit the limit on that description for a couple of years, and then when you do, it's going to be a little frustrating. So that's something to think about if you plug maintenance information in here. This screen, the default screen, does exactly what you would think it would do. For example, the typical default way that we are going to charge this dozer to a job is hourly. So whether we're going into equipment and recording the revenue there, or whether we are going into payroll and entering the pieces of equipment as we process our payroll, we're saying it's our hourly by default. We also can say what job cost code does it go to. So if, for example, you want the equipment of the employee, the guy's working on site work and it's excavation today and demolition tomorrow, it would flip-flop between those two cost codes. However, if it's something like rented equipment and you just want it to go to a cost code called rented equipment, you could have a cost code called rented equipment. They always charge that, regardless of where the guy works. It's rented equipment. Most people do track equipment and put a category on here. And in this case, in my sample, I have two separate kinds of categories, equipment versus equipment rental, maybe because they're supposed to hit two different GL accounts based on the way our retrieval method is set up. The system also integrates with fixed asset software by Sage called FAS. And this is the field that links the FAS ID to the equipment setup in the FAS software. So for example, in here, we're not seeing a lot of information about depreciation methods. I think on one of the ownership tabs, we kind of said, what kind of, there's a couple of generic places for it, but it's not generating depreciation entries. If you need the software to generate depreciation entries for you and then charge those to your equipment, then you might want to look into getting the fixed asset software to integrate with that software. Under miscellaneous, you can say kind of like that something is a component of something else. So kind of like the example of the snowplow. The plow could be a separate piece of equipment, or it's a piece of the equipment. So you could say it's only, I'm going to track my equipment IDs are not just the dozer, but it's oh gosh, DOZ dash, I don't know, ABC versus DEF, and they're two different pieces of the same piece of equipment or something along those lines. I'm just going to leave it at that for now, unless you have questions. The other thing that's tracked are totals, and the system during setup asks whether you want to track week to date, next week, month to date, actually it asks if you want week to date, month to date, year to date, and life to date. And there are little boxes that some of which you can turn on and off. Most people say, well, I probably may not need week to date. I don't even necessarily know if I need month to date, because if I'm looking for the month, I might want to look at all the transactions and not just a total. Year to date and life to date are ones that you probably do want to turn on. Or not. We'll take a look at that. We could take a look at that setup. And it will track the last date of a cost update to that piece of equipment. Revenue. How has this piece of equipment, kind of like a job has costs and a job has revenue. A piece of equipment has costs and ideally it has revenue. You've got to pay for it has to pay for its keep. I don't know what that little flashing thing is on my screen. It's doing the disco here or something here. I'm going to ignore it for now, and hopefully it won't get any more annoying than it is. And in here for our revenue total, same kind of controls. And that's about it for equipment setup. So I'm going to just say save or cancel out of here. I don't think I have any custom fields set up, but I'm just saving it out of here. So that's kind of like an overview of equipment, kind of what it does or how it's set up. When we look at getting entries into the software, under Tools is where we can customize our entry. And we're just going to look at some of our entry grids and talk about it. But the other thing that's really interesting is we can import our entries. So Sage gets really interesting, and it's a real flexible program. We have different people using different methods of importing and entering and processing payroll time, for example. And some of our site work contractors use a program called, I think it's called HCSS, for project management, and Heavy Job and Heavy Bid, and some of those programs track not only time, but they also track equipment on the job site. And the project managers put the time for the employees, and they put the time in maybe for the equipment. And so sometimes the data entry for payroll is not being done in Sage, and the other program that you're kind of using to track that equipment may or not have the flexibility to put the equipment in with the payroll time. Or you just might not want to put it in with the payroll time, just because I'm tracking my employees' hours by the hour, and I'm tracking my equipment by the day. So I don't want to have to say it's 8 hours. I just want to plug that total in for the week and say, yeah, I used it 3 days on the job site, not 24 hours or however that many hours was. So there's some really good reasons for maybe not wanting to put your equipment in with payroll. So if need be, you can import entries into equipment costs. And that is an option there. So I'm going to go into tasks and look at just entering revenue. And when we go to enter revenue, the questions here are, is it external, meaning are we billing somebody else, or are we billing our own jobs? And the reason we care about that is because in equipment settings, under all of these wonderful settings, here's one that asks if we're going to accumulate revenue units to our equipment, hours or days or whatever. I've said no. And when we post, we can control how much detail we set. But they're under our GL entry settings, we have different capabilities for revenue and costs, and we can also set up and use account tables. Kind of like you can set up different rate tables for billing purposes in billing. You can set up account tables to say, hey, for this piece of equipment, hit this account, debit this and credit that. And you can do it for both the revenue, debit and credit side, or the cost, revenue and credit side. And can control whether you're going to override that kind of stuff. So you've got a lot of options in here, and here are the totals where we're tracking whether we are going to track weekly, monthly, and yearly totals for each piece of equipment, and are we tracking meter readings? So if you go back from today and you say, hey, I know our system doesn't let us track meter readings, why not? Or why aren't we seeing them on our job total? It might be because these boxes, you know, I'm seeing life to date, but I'm not seeing year to date meter readings. You might want to go back and start tracking this information that's in here. Okay. So when I go into tasks, I am going to say enter revenues. And does anybody out there need to charge revenue to externally? Do you have like an equipment rental company? Nope. Okay, so I'm going to say let's use internal. And here's where it's going to say, I'm going to kind of pull this apart a little bit. And I can't right-click and add columns here, but if I needed to add or delete columns, I could change that under Customize Time Entry, but I wanted you to see this screen here. So in here, we can pull up our piece of equipment. I'm going to pick on this lovely backhoe. And then since I've set that up as a default to hourly, I see that number 1. Or I could pull up a list, either with my list button or my F4 button, and can change that if I need to. I can change the view here to see them by ID number instead of code number. And then I can put a description in there. So a lot of my clients will say, I don't really need to track a description. I know I am putting in my hourly time charged to this was charged to this particular job, and it was on the Northwest Food Warehouse, and it was for demolition or tobacco, whatever.
That's the job cost, though, not
yeah,
the equipment.
very good. So at this point, since it's revenue, good point, Gary, since it is revenue, it is sending the costs and charging the job. It's a cost to the job, but revenue for the piece of equipment. And when I first, I'm like, what? Why is the equipment earning revenue? Well, yeah, it kind of makes sense when I think it through. It has costs, like we changed the tires and insurance and registrations, but it's charged to this job and to this cost code. And down here, we can see the equipment is backhoe. The revenue is being billed hourly, and it's in hours. It's being charged to the job and the cost code. So when it's charged to the job and the cost code, it's earning revenue for the equipment. It is the accounting date. I think I'm back, and I'm going to use 15 because I think that's my data set. And since it's hourly, I'm going to say maybe it's 8 hours, or is it 40 hours and I'm just plugging in my equipment for the week. So that's up to you and to determine what kind of detail do you need for your reports. So if, for example, you're doing a job where you've agreed to show all of your costs, you know, to Mr. Owner, and you need to show it day by day by day, I might say it's 8 hours. If they're okay with saying, I see 40 hours on for every Friday because it was there all week, you know, that's up to you. I'm not going to tell you which way is best.
Your revenue,
and that goes,
one's hourly.
This one's hourly. So in this case, since our revenue code is hourly, we're going to say it's 8 hours or it's 40 hours. If my revenue code was set to daily, I want to make sure that I put in 1 day or 5 days and not 8 or 40 here, or I have a mess. So when I say 8 hours, you can set up different rate tables as well, revenue rates and cost rates. And I don't think I have any set up for this that include this piece of equipment, or that would pre-fill the same way my revenue code of number 1 pre-filled. So you can set up a revenue rate table, and when we set up those revenue rates, I'm going to say I've just got an hourly rate table in there, and you define the rate table. I'm going to say standard hourly rates, for example, and I might have one for PennDOT, I might want to have one for New Jersey DOT, I might want to have one for my favorite customers. It's up to you. And in this case, they're just billing it by the equipment type and the job. So if I look at this table here, it's saying when this backhoe is used on this job, it's $50 an hour. Well, I'm saying that it is, I'm going to say when my backhoe, any of my backhoes are charged to job 03002, bill it out at $65 an hour. And I'm just going to leave that there and say okay, and save that and close it. So on my next line, here I may not know what that rate is. I'm going to say, well, this one's only $55 an hour. Does the math for me. It knows what to debit and what to credit. And as I go through here, based on my settings, my debit account is cost of sales equipment, and my credit account is income, revenue for the equipment. And I might want to say that's equipment revenue, not just regular revenue, not regular income. So I'll leave that up to you. Now I'm going to say that same piece of equipment moved. So the next day, it moved to 03002. Same cost code. And you can use those auto set features. If I click up here, I might use the same accounting date for everything in that week, or I might say, no, this was the 25th, and this is the 26th. It's another 8 hours. Now I'm hoping it did not pre-fill. So what I'm thinking is that since I went in and set up that rate table after I came in here, that it's not pulling that rate automatically. My thought is if I get out of there and come back in and try it again, I'm going to cancel that line and finish and go ahead and post. And I'm going to go back into tasks and revenues. Internal. The equipment was the backhoe, right? Any old kind of backhoe that's set up with a code of backhoe. It's hourly again. The job was 03002. The cost code 2-demolition is fine. 8 hours. Okay, there's something going on with my rate because I was expecting it to pull up the rate, but you should get it to pull up the rate. I should have quit while I was ahead and just said that it was out there and probably was pre-filling. So I would have to look and see, did I put the wrong job number in? Did I go back and I look at the backhoe? Does it have the equipment type of backhoe, or were we talking about changing it and have it, you know, set up as a truck or something goofy? There's all kinds of reasons why it may or may not pull the right rate, but to get the right combination, it should be pulling the right information in here automatically. I'm going to cancel this. Now, if I say, hey, I don't need that description in there, I'm going to go to Tools, and I'm going to customize my entry for my revenue. If I've got a list of views, just internal and external. So what I like about here is if you don't ever have external, you might want to delete that one, because that way you can't pick the wrong one by accident. I'm going to leave both of them in here, but it's just like customizing a payroll grid. Okay. Cancel. When we go into tasks, we can also enter costs in here, either miscellaneous costs that we talked about or standard costs. A lot of times our costs aren't necessarily entered in equipment, but they're entered in accounts payable. Is anybody out there entering the costs directly into equipment? Or is everything pretty much going through AP? AP, yeah. So I don't quite, I kind of get the payroll, why you would enter the revenue in there for a few reasons. Maybe, you know, the same person that reports the payroll time doesn't report the equipment. You need to get your payroll out the door quickly. You're using a different payroll way to import your hours. But the revenue, this is here. I'm going to say it's here. I'm not going to spend any time on it because usually you do that in AP. And hopefully in AP, when you go in and you enter your invoices, you've got, you know, your equipment cost code is that equipment ID and cost code coming up automatically for you? So I'm going to show one thing in accounts payable. In AP settings, behind the scenes, on invoice settings, and then if we go to distribution settings, in here for your vendors, you have multiple kinds of vendors. There's 4 different vendor types that you can rename. Now, yours might be named something like subcontractor, supplier, other equipment supplier, or maybe that's just equipment instead of equipment supplier. And then maybe for the equipment, you have check boxes next to things like equipment, you know, equipment. I'm looking for equipment information right here. So if when you go into enter AP invoices, if it's not prompting you for the piece of equipment in the cost code, equipment cost code, it's because this little box here is not checked or because the vendor is not set up as an equipment supplier. So if I want that to show up for all of my vendors, I would check all of these boxes. I'm going to leave it alone. Is everybody okay with when they enter their invoices, the equipment cost codes coming up automatically without saying add this column?
Yes, ours is.
Okay, great. So I'm not going there. You understand that? That's what controls it. And then on the vendor type, you would say it's an equipment type of vendor, and then it would automatically pre-fill. The other thing that's kind of interesting in there is that you can turn on, and I don't think I have many people who do this, but to put in miscellaneous entry codes, you know, in equipment cost as well. So you can use those. There were some additional miscellaneous entry 1 and miscellaneous entry 2 fields. I think like asset manager was one on the equipment record. You can turn those on as well so that you see them in entering your AP invoices. Okay, enough on that. So back to equipment cost, and in your maintenance, if we go to setup and we go to miscellaneous entry codes, within equipment cost itself, we can track accidents, diesel downtime, miles, tires, tons, trips, whatever. All of these are just miscellaneous codes. So I go into tasks and I say enter miscellaneous entries, and I give it a piece of equipment, and I say it's that good old case backhoe, and I give it a date, and I give it an accounting date if it's something that's supposed to hit job cost or GL. And some things like, maybe I don't need an accounting date, it's a meter reading, right? So I might customize my time entry grid so that, or my daily entry grid and have multiple miscellaneous entry grids, one for odometer readings. So I don't really need an accounting date. I don't need number of gallons. Exactly, it's not accounting related. So why do that? I can say my meter reading is, and I'm good to go. And since in there it still wants an accounting date. Now maybe it wants an accounting date anyway. Okay, for reporting purposes or whatnot. Maybe it's requiring it. Okay. And then I just kind of go on to do the next one. So in here, you can use this kind of information to track just miscellaneous information. But I'm going to finish out of here for a moment, and we're going to look at setup miscellaneous entries. So if I go to Tools, and the same way I looked at your revenue entries, we're going to say Customize Entries, and we're going to go to Miscellaneous. And if I pull up a list, when I said, task, enter, miscellaneous entries, it automatically said weekly sheets, weekly sheets. I'm going to create another one that's going to be just
monthly.
Or not even monthly. I'm going to say it's Washington miles. And I want to track, now you'll note that it's not asking me for the equipment. It knows, hey, you're putting in these entries for a piece of equipment. You don't get that as a choice. And maybe I want to put in Washington miles and how many trips I did and how many tons of gravel I hauled or something along those lines. So you can do that kind of thing as well. Now, the other thing that's kind of interesting in here is at the top here, this is saying these are your entry fields. This is what you see and are prompted to enter, Washington miles and trips, for example. If I click on index, I can go and say, let me see what shows up when I do that. So I could show, for example, how many miles, Oregon miles were there previously. And so I could, say, all right, let's show what was there before for Washington miles and go from there. Note that this is not necessarily the odometer reading, right? Because here I'm flip-flopping, I'm out on the West Coast between Oregon and Washington. So I'm just tracking how many miles each piece of equipment was used in on the highways in each state. Maybe not the miles at the job site, but miles at each state. Any other ideas on what you could use this kind of thing for? I'm going to say okay. The other thing I can do here is I can change my journal that prints out, and that's about it for here. I'm just going to say save and close. The other thing we could set up was some kind of miscellaneous entry code for maintenance. If I just want to track some kind of maintenance where unit description is none, I'm just going to accumulate amounts there, and I'm going to say okay. And maybe that's about all I want to do. I'm going to set up a miscellaneous, a customized entry for miscellaneous. I'm going to create one called maintenance. And the field is going to be maybe just one called, let's go to the, let me go into index and look at the output fields. I want to see maybe not a whole lot of anything, but what I want to do is in here, I want to just track the piece of equipment, and maybe for my entry, on my entry field, maybe I just want to enter some kind of maintenance, or I just want to put in a note or something. I'm not going to do a whole lot, just kind of write a description of what the heck was done. In this case, maybe I'm not tracking the cost of parts, I just want to track miscellaneous notes about them. maybe not quite like an accident, but accidents are the same kind of thing, where you want just a description and want additional information entered in there. And maybe some attachments, take pictures and attach those or something. So now when I go into tasks and I enter miscellaneous entries, now you're going to see that I've got all these additional options as well. So if I go into Washington miles, what piece of equipment? Let's use something a little bit different. Let's use some kind of a truck, a 2016 F-250. I'm going to say it's 15. The accounting date. It still wants that accounting date. And how many miles did I put in there? 25. And it was one trip. Now, apparently there weren't any Washington miles out there already to display. That's okay. I'm just starting to track this information. The other thing that you can do, though, I'm going to say, fine, finish out of here, but you can put attachments in here. So your attachments can be your notes. And is it at the equipment level or is it the transaction level? I want to put it at the transaction level so that I can design a really nice little report that's going to pull the equipment, the date, maybe the number of miles in this case, and some kind of transaction notes that can go on and on and on. I'm not going to do a file link, but if I go into attachments and I'm going to say, okay, edit my transaction notes, here you can go ahead and plug in your notes. So as of today, blah, 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 blah. And I can track exactly what was done. I think of maintenance, I could do the maintenance record for it. I could even scan in a maintenance record and attach it if I needed to, or I might use my Sage paperless for that because it'd be easier to retrieve that documentation. I wouldn't have to be back at this level to get the details of those attachments. But does that kind of help you out in ways to track maintenance in the system? Kevin and Matt, can you see yourselves maybe using some of those miscellaneous types of transactions, entries to track your maintenance?
Yeah, potentially. We're real curious about this third-party thing because that, kind of just to see our options with maintenance. Okay,
so Judy, you're using this third-party software, and in that software, you need things like schedule oil. You can do all kinds of wonderful things. Would you be willing to share what your company is using it for?
You mean well, we just track mainly the maintenance and then repairs. We have just the two different cost codes.
Okay. And then are you using the third-party software as well by enabling? Or this software that we're looking at right now?
Yeah, we have I'm not sure what you mean by the third party.
Okay. Some companies want to take their equipment cost to the next level. So what they want to do is, on top of tracking equipment cost and equipment,
generate and track a maintenance schedule.
So like I want to track a maintenance schedule where every 3,000 miles I'm going to get the truck's oil changed, or every 2 weeks I'm going to have it come in and check the oil and the tire pressure.
Right, and they can build out a list of products, whether it's filters or lubricants, whatever they might need, for that schedule too. So they can say on any certain age range or miles range, they can record that information and track that information and anticipate the next visit, and also have personnel and supplies ready for that.
That makes sense?
Yeah, we just have the equipment cost.
Okay, you have the software that we are looking at this morning, which is perfect.
Yes.
It's perfect. And I think Matt and Kevin are looking to see, to extend that to do even more with it. So what I'm going to recommend do.
One thing we do, like with the attachments, we scan in like a picture of the equipment and also like the license and whatever paperwork go with that equipment. We like scan it into as an attachment.
And when you go into the piece of equipment, I'm going to finish out of here and post those. And when you go into like set up equipment, at that point, when I'm pulling up my backhoe or my truck or whatever, and you go into your attachments here, you might take a picture of that truck.
Right.
Oh, there is a picture of a piece of equipment in here. Yeah, I'm seeing like there's Jerry Peters.
Great idea.
Yeah, make this smaller. I've got to move this here. Yeah, I did. Or I thought I did. JPEGs and bitmaps and. Here we go. So let's say you wanted, we're going to pretend that this is a truck and not a gravel road. Now it's telling me it's local, but right from here you can get to those documents, whether it's a picture of the truck, whether it's a license or whatnot. That's a really great use of equipment cost.
So where's that picture saved? Do we have to keep the file path?
Excellent question. The downside of that, I don't know if it's a downside. It is stored, the downside of the way I'm using it today is it is stored on my C drive, buried on this horrible location. So if you're going to start using these attachments, you can definitely start using that as, store it someplace on your server so that everybody can get access to it.
Otherwise, and if it would ever move, it would get lost.
Exactly. The other option to use with that is to actually, some people are starting to do more of that in their document management software, their Sage paperless software, so that they can set up document types of, link them to each piece of equipment and track the different documents by date and equipment type of document. Is it a picture of the ownership of what it looks like? Is it an accident? Do I need to label it as an accident? Is it a picture of the equipment itself? Is it a license for the piece of equipment? Is it a license for my employees who are driving the equipment? So each of those could have different classification fields in your paperless software so that you could track all of that information and retrieve it without, the downside here, I think, is that if I want to get to that attachment, I could go to my server if it was on a server and could find it and kind of know that I'm storing it under drive server /equipment / and maybe a folder for each piece of equipment. It might be a logical way to do it, but I have to kind of know that path. Or I come in here and I see all the multiple attachments here. So if I add another piece of equipment and I say it's this is my license, whatever. I've got this whole list here, but I have to know to get into the piece of equipment to get to these documents. Where I can't just say, show me all of my pictures for all of my equipment at once, regardless of what equipment ID it is. I kind of need to get to that piece of equipment. I'm going to say, yeah, sure, save those attachments. Now I can see that it looks like something is underneath that. Any other creative uses of equipment cost? Thanks for your input. What I want to do is take a break for about 10 minutes. Welcome back. Is everyone back?
Yeah.
I can see the people in the room are back. So it's one problem with being online. So here is, no, this is the wrong one. This is equipment cost. You sent the wrong one. We're gonna pick on Fred because he said during break he would send me over some information on equipment maintenance, and he sent me the stuff on equipment cost, which is what everybody online has. So this I'm gonna come back to here. We're gonna go to Plan B again. Okay, we're going to get started, and we'll come back to that one. On options for a overview, I think we've covered. Equipment maintenance will get you more information on the additional product. Options for entering equipment revenue, equipment or through payroll. So what we've seen so far is in equipment cost, the equipment cost program, we know that we can go into tasks and we can enter revenue. So we understand that. We can get rid of the external. We can just use the internal. It'll know the GL accounts, et cetera, et cetera. So I am going to switch gears for a moment.
He's looking for.
He's looking.
Now.
Okay.
I'll
No,
monitor.
we're going to go to we're going to go in and we're going to go into payroll. And in payroll, what we can do is I'm going to go into tools and take a look at customized time entry. And I just happen to already have a view set up called Equipment View. Surprise, surprise. Now, your Equipment View might be a little bit different than my Equipment View once you're all said and done. But what happens is I can say that when I enter my payroll time, in this case, I'm entering it by employee, and then by equipment, and then equipment cost code, if I'm repairing or doing something for the equipment, because when we enter our costs, we enter the cost code. If it's revenue, I believe we skip the cost code, and the job. So if we're not putting in we're not repairing the equipment, we're going to skip the cost code and go to the job, put in maybe a description of what we're doing, a pay ID, units, a rate, and amount. And as we look at these list of fields, if I enter into here and scroll up and down in here, there's my equipment and my equipment cost code. So if you have your own custom entry grid, you can just, and equipment is not listed in it, you can just double click and add equipment to the bottom of the list. If you need to adjust and put equipment up in the middle somewhere, there is no insert here button. You have to erase the stuff below it and then reselect those fields of information. So take a picture of this before you change it. Take notes, a screenshot, whatever, so you don't wreck your entry grid, or just create a brand new one and call it equipment and copy your existing one and set it up from scratch. So either way works. But if I said instead cancel my changes to this one, instead I wanted to do this standard one, and my standard view did not have equipment, as you'll see here, to get and add this in, if I add it to the end, I'm great, but I really don't want it after the units, rates, and amount, so I have to erase last, erase last, erase last. And as I do this, like, the description goes away. As I do it again, the amount goes away. I can't see those fields, so I'm going to put it back the way it was, amount, and then description. I'm good to go again, but know what's in here before you start changing it. The other thing I want to point out is in setup for our employees. You have the ability on, let me find a person. I'm going to pick on Jose. And in Jose's setup, over on the right-hand side of this entry info tab, you have the ability to put in a piece of equipment. So if Jose always utilizes that F-150 truck, what was it called? Truck F-250, whatever, there it is, I can put that in there. Or if Jose is a shop person who is always working on engines, and that's what he does, is repair engines all day long, not necessarily on this truck that he owns, but what I can do here is I can pre-fill it with the engine block with heads, or that's a good reason to not get crazy detailed. He works on repairing equipment. It's, you know, not necessarily engines, it's just equipment repair. I don't maybe necessarily need to know how many hours he spent on the engine block versus the fuel system versus the whatever. But hopefully that gives you an idea of how it works. I'm going to say engine is, or engine block with heads is fine. Okay, so Jose, good old 107, has some equipment, and actually I'm going to wipe this out from him and whoever my next person is, Terry Brock is going to drive the that truck. Now, I would need to probably, before this to work properly, if I wanted to automatically charge, there's a way in the system to say automatically charge this and auto bill his equipment as revenue to that, for that time, for the equipment piece. So if I said automatically bill that equipment revenue to that, I could, if I set up the rate table properly. So there's some setup issues again, but once I have it set up, I can automatically bill that to that guy's truck to that piece of equipment and have it automatically generate those transactions. Anybody doing that now where you're saying, hey, Joe Schmo has a truck and we need to charge $10 an hour or $10 a day or whatever to that piece of equipment? Kind of a neat concept. I'm not going to even worry a whole lot about setting up the rate. I'm just going to mention that it's there unless somebody wants to go through the process to see exactly how it's set up. So just note that if things are not going automatically, it's either because this box is not checked or because the rate is not set up appropriately, either in the rate table or the piece of somewhere behind the scenes. We'll leave it at that for now. Okay. So now let's attempt to go into task, and I'm going to go into enter time. Some of us use enter time, some of us use enter checks. You know what? I'm going to go back and go into enter checks because we can process at the same time. I like that better. Just personal preference. And this time, I'm going to go into my equipment view. And that period end date is fine. And I'm going to pick on, I'm just going to pick on somebody that I did not put either a piece of equipment or a cost code on. So if I pick on Wayne Daniels, period end date was 5/19/15. What piece of equipment? Well, if Wayne doesn't have a piece of equipment, I just skip right over it and entry on as normal. Make sense? Say he is using a piece of equipment. Let me pick on my backhoe. And he is not repairing the piece of equipment, but that piece of equipment needs to get charged to the job as well as Wayne's time. Then I'm going to give it the job. I'm going to give it a cost code. Demolition, dewatering, excavate, and backfill is fine. Question. Great, and we'll come back. Perfect. So Fred sent some information on the equipment maintenance. I'm going to skip the description. Maybe I don't need it. If I was repairing the piece of equipment, maybe I would want that. We're going to take a look at that a little bit later. Regular, he works 8 hours. Now, immediately, I can go in here and put in information about the equipment, and let's say he's costing that piece of equipment. So if this is also going to, he's going to repair that piece of equipment, or the equipment itself is going to go as equipment. In this case, it's revenue. Defaults with his revenue code automatically. Right, that was on the piece of equipment. We looked at that and saw that earlier. How many units, and if my rate was predefined and pulling from that revenue rate table appropriately, it would know it. Or I'm just going to say it's $2, an hour. It's $45 an hour. And if I need to pick up additional equipment, so he only worked 8 hours, but he's using this for 8 hours, or he was 6 hours on this piece of equipment and 2 hours on something else, I could do that. Or think about the snowplow. We're charging not only for the truck, but we're also attached the plow, and the plow has some maintenance. It has to have 50 cents an hour or something, whatever you want to do in there. So you can have multiple pieces of equipment, multiple entries in here, and I can put in notes and attachments and things as well if I need to. I'm going to keep it simple, close this up, and I've got that time in there. So he's actually working on that piece of equipment, charging it to the job. as revenue.
He's
running the piece of equipment.
Necessarily doing mechanical.
No, next maybe
Operator.
he's operating that piece of equipment, so my equipment cost code is blank. It's not a cost to the piece of equipment. Let's say it breaks down. He's out plowing snow, and it breaks down, and he spends the next few hours attempting to get that piece of equipment running. So at this point, what he's going to do is charge it probably just to repairs, but if it was like something with the engine or the brakes or the tire, let's keep it simple. He's replacing a tire. He's doing whatever. He's doing something with the tire. I'm not charging that to the job. It's just getting charged to the piece of equipment. Now, there is a way you can set up a memo that will hit not only the equipment, but the job as well. So I'm going to say nope. For right now, I'm going to say tire blew out. It's overtime for him, right? 2 hours, 3 hours, however long it takes. Take me forever. And it does not go to that equipment screen because it says, okay, I know that you're just costing this to, my time is going to repair that piece of equipment. Now I'm going to process. My process button is moving around on me like normal. Doesn't have my appropriate tax rate in there, but there we go. And I am going to accept my check. It's even calculating my union vacation for my hours that I spent fixing the tire. I'm a union guy, and I'm good for him. Now, I'm going to go back to 107, same period end date. Notice how for Jose, it's pre-filling with his, it was pre-filling. Let me cancel my line. It's pre-filling with my equipment cost code. When I press enter, if I do not put in a piece of equipment, he's not working on that piece of equipment, so obviously it does not need a cost code for the repair of that equipment. It just skips by and I enter his time as normal. He's shopped, maybe it's just 40 regular hours or whatever it happens to be. So you can enter both your operator time in here, or you can enter your time to repair those pieces of equipment. Does that make sense?
So I have a question.
Definitely jump in.
The way to get it to charge to operating time is by putting a job number in?
Yes, because you're going to, you want to charge it as a cost to the job, correct?
Right.
Yes. So the cost to the job is revenue for the piece of equipment. So we put the equipment in. I've got it in there for the one guy. So what I want to happen, the period end date was 5/19. I'm gonna do one more guy for 107. So let's say for 107, we're gonna use, let's say he was running this dozer. Now I'm going to blank out the equipment cost because he's not repairing the dozer, he's actually running it. And I want it to charge to this job. And the cost code is going to be, demolition is fine. And 8 hours, or 40 hours. Let's say you worked there all week. This is his hourly rate. And then the equipment is getting charged to the job, same job cost code. The revenue is hourly. I'm going to make it something goofy, 41.22, so it kind of sticks out. Okay? Oh, no. 40 hours, and I want the rate to be 41.22. So at this point, it's going to charge 40 hours at 41.22 for a total of 16.48. I'm going to say, okay, close that up. He has 40 hours for his time. He has 40 hours for the piece of equipment. I am going to process his check. And I'm going to accept my check. I'm quickly looking at these guys because I don't know if they had direct deposit or not. I can see that Jose does not. Who was my other guy? It was Wayne, right? Wayne Daniels. Wayne, if I go back and look at that, that's why I picked a Wayne, to be honest with you. I don't see a direct deposit for Wayne either. So I'm going to have to print these checks before I can post them and see what the heck goes over to equipment cost, right? So cancel my changes to this check and finish out of there and print my check journal. Now, if I go to printouts, up here, I usually have printouts like under favorites, right from here, printouts. And it's 2017, it is April. I was in payroll. I was entering checks today. So the top one should be the one that I just did, and then I went in and out for one other thing too, but let's look at this one. So let me scrunch that up. So if we pull this up and zoom in a bit. So we're seeing the payroll part of it where, you know, he's got his normal pays and deductions and fringe benefits, and since I have not changed my entry grid, I'm not seeing anything special on here where there's no equipment. So if I was going to start really utilizing and entering equipment, the other thing I would do, if, you know, maybe for my gross to net, I don't care, but on my timesheet report, I would want to make sure that I added the equipment ID and the equipment cost code. I'm going to say, okay, that's fine. That looks normal as I expect.
It might be on the timesheet report, but we didn't do the enter time.
Right. And actually, if we looked at, let's just go to reports real quick, or I'm going to go to an inquiry. Inquiry is easier because I can very easily add information. I'm going to go into check information and look at check time. Oh, there's another one right below it called equipment detail. Let's look at that. It's not posted, so it's in new. And I'm seeing my time by piece of equipment. Now, I want to see things like insert a column in here and include number of units. And I also want to insert a column in here and include the unit cost or the rate. So we're seeing that it is doing exactly what we're telling it to do. It is saying, hey, I have to charge, and you can add all kinds of wonderful things. And if you have Inquiry Designer, make this permanent. You're not doing it every time we come in here, but it is doing what we're asking it to do. Does that make sense? I'm going to continue on, and I'm going to actually quickly just attempt to post those checks. And when I go in here, I'm going to say either the employee is equal to 107 or employee is equal to 110. Now, they might have some more checks hanging out there because this is sample data. But let's see if we can at least get it to post those two checks. Actually, I have to print the darn checks first, don't I? Print checks. I'm going to give it a bank account would help. Give it an appropriate date. I'm going to click on ranges. It was 107.
Check date has to be after this.
No, but it is. Use 420s. Oh, I'm using 518, right? I don't think it'll care. I really don't, but that's a good point. I'll change it once I'm in there. I said it was 5. Which one is it?
Yeah,
It was one employee. I've got several checks for 107. I am going.
110 is probably the same as that. So check with their. The only one is 519.
519. So I'm going to do this one and not that one. And let's make this 522. And my checks are going to go to an Adobe PDF. and my register is going to go wherever it normally goes. So I'm just going to go for it. Start, print those checks. It's not flashing at me. It's usually a good sign. Telling me what employee it's on.
Right.
Trying.
Maybe it's right. It's desktop.
Is it? It might be asking me for a stupid Adobe file or
File name.
something.
Maybe. Maybe just flashing on the bottom, like the desktop icon to your left, like that. Something else. No, red, yellow at it.
Okay, it wouldn't be a presentation without something going wrong, right, Gary?
So the equipment information is
The
not normally printing on the check. It's
No, it isn't. I just wanted to print the checks, not to look at the checks. I wanted to look at the journal from the posting journal. So what I'm going to do here is just terminate this task where it's trying to print the check. Didn't like something there. I am going to go back into background tasks and see if it still thinks it's trying to terminate that one.
Right.
It's trying.
Okay.
What?
We don't have to get hung up.
We don't have to get hung up on that. So what I wanted to show, though, was the posting so that you could see that it actually created those entries for equipment cost. I'm going to go to equipment cost. Let me see. I'm going to just kill it. How to wreck your data, what not to do. All right, so if I go, now it's really flashing at me. Equipment. Stop flashing. I'm going to go back in, more than one way to skin the cat. I'm going to go back in and say they're manual checks and then try to post them. So it was 107 on 5/19/15. Check record is in here. It's,
Yeah.
okay. Okay. What I'm going to do, I'm going to go to 110. Okay. Life is good. I'm going to say that one's a manual check. Check number and check date is 5/22/19/15. Yeah, it has the bank account in use as well. So at this point, I'm going to probably have to, I'm not going to restart to see that. We're going to just kind of move on from there. But what I expect to see at that point, what I wanted to show you was the posting journal. So what I will do is, along with the meeting minutes, we will include the posting journal. And then what you will see, let's go to equipment cost. If I look at an inquiry here and I look at my revenue, under inquiries, I have profit analysis and utilization. I also have entries. I like to look at entries by a piece of equipment. This is one of my favorites. And I'm going to look at the stuff that's current because I know payroll didn't, I don't think it's set up in equipment cost with the sample data to automatically post. And I know there's some data in here. So, for example, on my backhoe, I have life-to-date revenue, and if I drill down, here's how it is charging that revenue to my pieces of equipment. So I did some revenue. I worked maybe one day, 1 month. It's monthly. It's showing me that it's monthly, and it charged this much to that piece of equipment for revenue. It will also have charged that much to the job as a cost to the job. So it's doing two things at once, hitting revenue for the equipment and cost for the job. Here's another one that's just hourly, and I'm seeing my rates. So, makes sense? Any questions?
I have a question back to when you did the setup employee and you put a piece of equipment in.
Yes.
What if, like, most of the time they're using that equipment, but like if they have a meeting or working in the shop, those are two examples where we would not charge the equipment to the job. Is there a way to take it out at that point if you have it in setup screen?
Yes, you can. If I put it in on a piece of equipment and I do not check this box, like if I don't say automatically bill, but I put on the entry info in, if I put the piece of equipment in here, like his truck, then when I go in there, it's going to default to have that truck in there, and I can enter the number of hours. So if, let's say, I put in that he worked 40 hours that week, when it goes to that next screen with the equipment on it, I can say he only used that equipment for 36 hours because he's 4 hours he was in a meeting or on vacation or whatever happens to be the case. Does that make sense?
Okay.
Okay. If I check auto bill my equipment revenue, then it's just going to automatically, I believe, bill that time. So that automatically creates revenue entries. I'm looking up here for equipment when entering earnings charged to a job for this employee.
Okay.
Only use this box for this if the revenue for this employee is based on the same number of units as his earnings. So if it's going to vary, I don't want to check that box.
Okay, right.
Or you have to, right, or you could go
without the
you could have put it in a separate line without the equipment. No, I think it's going to do it automatically. I don't even
If you put the piece of equipment on the employee on that pay line, yes, but there's no piece of equipment
there's even I believe it even automatically without even putting the equipment in. So I have people who import equipment or import time, 40 hours, and since on his record it's set up to automatically bill his truck, it should automatically bill his truck without me having to say he worked on that piece of equipment or he ran that piece of equipment. So in here, if I say auto bill equipment revenue for Robert Jones, and I also put in his piece of equipment, and my rate table is set up to appropriately know the right way to bill that piece of equipment from him, what I expect to happen is when I process his payroll without even putting that he has a truck, like I can just use my standard view, I expect it to generate equipment costs.
Okay. If you don't check the box and just put the equipment number in, it'll just like pre-fill for you?
Exactly. It'll pre-fill not only the piece of equipment, but like if he's running it, if he's running the piece of equipment, you want to charge the equipment to the jobs, you just put the piece of equipment in here and you leave the cost code blank because he's not repairing the equipment,
right.
He's running the equipment. And then you'll get both screens, one for the employee and then the employee's equipment, which will pre-fill with the same number of hours you put in for the guy.
Okay, okay. Yeah,
okay? That's
good.
probably what you were probably going to want. You may not want to automatically do it or you lose control.
Right.
Right. Now, so I have some people who say, yeah, I don't care what he is. His truck payment's the same. So even when he's on vacation or a meeting, I want it to charge or try to calculate that automatically. Others like, well, no, only when he's on, something job related. So there's a couple ways to approach it. If you do it this way, it's just going to pre-fill with his piece of equipment, but you totally control the number of hours charged to that piece of equipment for the revenue for that equipment.
Okay. Yeah, that answers my question. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions on payroll and equipment? And if not, I am going to jump to Fred's email. Oh, I just put
the older documents.
Yeah, let's look at the documents that Fred sent me. Drum roll, please. down to, thank you. Let me go to the right one.
Good
So
job.
he has two different attachments, an equipment maintenance brochure and an equipment planner, US version. These are international products. And we can definitely send this either to you, right away as an email, or we can do this as a, attachment to the meeting minutes, and we will definitely be able to schedule a more
Those are older
detailed
documents,
window.
so we
And these
wanna
are
get-
older.
we
We'll
wanna
get you
get
more up-to-date information. It's an add-on product. Seamlessly integrates. You'll notice the screen here, even though it's a little bit, tiny, yes, but you'll notice that it has the similar look and feel as Sage. It's an entry grid here, and it is designed to operate with or without purchasing, inventory, payroll, or service. So if you're using any or all of those modules, you're not cut off. When they integrate products, this company does a nice job of not leaving things out. Service is not a stepchild here. We know that service people have trucks and equipment, so that it works quite well, and that you order parts and inventory for those pieces of equipment.
But it says right where your mouse is right now. Each schedule has its own services or service cycles, which automatically generate work orders.
Correct. So if you're using the service, you're a step ahead of the game, because not only do you set up a schedule for those oil changes or those whatever kinds of checks, whether it's a weekly or bi-weekly check to make sure your fluids are topped off or something else, it will automatically generate service work orders if you have the service application.
No. This is maintenance work order.
I'm sorry. Thank you, Gary, for jumping in there. So it'll create the service maintenance orders in here.
Right. Not necessarily related to service.
Okay. Within.
Then do you need the service management module?
Oh.
No, sorry, I'm leading you down the wrong path there. So Gary, thanks for jumping in there. So you can do it all within equipment maintenance.
Right. It's just to service that piece of equipment. It's not a standard service management for customers. This is just all internal. So it handles it.
Right.
Handle this for you without having to have service. And it'll generate a work ticket for somebody to go, okay, change the oil, rotate the tires, whatever, based on, and it says multiple different schedules. So you can have something based on an hour meter, something else based on an odometer, and something else based on a calendar, all for the same vehicle.
But if you do have service, it will integrate with your service management, D-board, et cetera. But without it, it's fine as well. So you can use it kind of just on top. You do need equipment cost. The Sage equipment cost that we've been showing today, that is a requirement. But that's all you would need, that with your standard Sage software. Because you're gonna definitely want your GL so it can create entries, et cetera. But with what you currently have, it would be fine without having to add purchasing, inventory, or service management.
And it used to be that this showed up just as another module in your Sage desktop called EM and equipment maintenance. It's in version 16 for Sage that is probably still under the applications down there. So there's that, but also Brent sent another.
Let's take a look at his other one.
Equipment planner, which attaches to this.
So here's another add-on on top of the, so you have equipment cost, which is, the out-of-the-box product that we're talking about all day today. Then you've got the equipment's maintenance, and then on top of that, you can put a calendar,
Right,
which kind of links it to a calendar interface.
Right. Equipment maintenance has its
This
own
is the
Go ahead.
This is the same company, both these modules.
Correct.
Enabling IT is the name of the company. Correct.
And so you see, have nice little schedule calendar views of what needs to be done, and can go from there. So we'll make sure you get the latest and greatest versions of these sheets. And if you would like to schedule like a demonstration of this software, we'll be happy to do so. Is this something anybody's interested in seeing more of?
Yeah, I think we would be. You can send it to us when you have the latest info.
Okay, great. We'll give you the latest sheets. I'll have Fred forward those on to you, and then if you'd like to see a demonstration of the equipment maintenance or the equipment scheduling calendar option, we will set that up for you. Any other questions today about equipment costs? Okay, does anyone want to contribute? What was the best thing you learned today? The most surprising thing you learned today? Not sure. Hopefully you learned something today. So that's kind of our goal. Our next meeting is next month, which is on May 24th, I believe, Gary?
Yes.
Yes. And the topic it is my assistant. So you can, if you know ahead of time what things you want to deal with in my assistant, you can definitely shoot us a quick email, or when you register, say, hey, I'm interested in learning how to use my assistant to do whatever it is you're interested in.
That's compatible with page 16 now, right?
That will interface with version 16, absolutely.
Okay.
Yes. Yes, there was a brief time frame where Sage, when 16 came out, that some things changed in version 16, including some versions of the pervasive database it ran on. It is now owned by a company called Actian instead of Pervasive. And they also updated their ODBC connectors, and it's now called Simba, just Simba, ODBC, something like that. There's some kind of Simba in there. I think it's a lion in the Lion King, but it's Simba is the ODBC connection. So when that happened, I think they did some testing, but real life testing finds more issues than testing in a test environment. And they realized that there were some, originally it was compatible. And then the next week they're like, oops, nope, don't load it. Don't go there. It's not quite compatible. There are some changes to the way it works with Simba and the versions that are integrating blah, blah, blah that are not compatible. And then they fairly quickly, in Sage terms, I think it was very quickly, came up with fixes for that or adjustments to the software so that, yes, my assistant does work with version 16. They did a nice job.
Good.
Yeah, so you're in good shape loading that. I would
We'll
get
be
on.
there. We bought it. We haven't used it, so we'll be there next month.
I would probably get on 16. Whenever we look at getting, and this, you can load 15, but then at some point before year end, you're gonna have to get to 16 anyway. So I would probably, 16 has been out long enough that you can go to 16.
Yeah, we're actually going to get on it next couple weeks.
Perfect. And then after that's, up and stable, I would then add my assistant for version 16, and you should be in good shape.
Wonderful.
Wonderful. And maybe even having some questions for the next breakfast meeting. So thank you all for joining us. We appreciate it. And hopefully we'll see you next week. Our next meeting, which is next month, not next week.
All right.